Every few years, we Americans rediscover that our political system was designed to produce exactly two parties. And we spend considerable energy being surprised by all this. From the Federalists versus Anti-Federalists to the Democratic Republicans and Whigs to today's Democrats versus Republicans, this binary choice has never changed. New parties only rise when one of the existing ones implode. And besides the UK, it's just not the same in Europe. You do have big parties ranging from the same big government versus small government split that we have here, to Greens, to splinter parties all along the right and left because the previous party wasn't right or left enough, to niche parties like the Dutch Party for Animals that all get elected to their national assemblies. But that's because most European countries use proportional representation, party list, or multiple rounds of voting that ensure more voters' views are at least represented in their parliaments. Like France's two-round system that ensures the eventual winner has an absolute majority of voters. But here in the United States and in the United Kingdom, we both use first past the post, meaning the candidate that gets the largest number of votes, even if not an absolute majority, gets the win. Not only does this ensure that the views of smaller parties aren't reflected in our House of Representatives or the House of Commons, but the victor often wins fewer votes than all of their opponents combined. And if you combine first past the post with the American Electoral College, then you get presidents that come in second, but because they won the right combination of states, they win the White House. That's happened 4 times in U.S. history. Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876, Benjamin Harrison in 1888, George W. Bush in 2000, and yes, Donald Trump in 2016, they're all guilty of this. And if what I'm saying makes sense, or if you'd like what I'm saying, a like or a subscription would be great. Every 2 weeks I'll explain another issue surrounding transatlantic politics, and hopefully I can explain what's going on in Europe for Americans, and what's going on in the US to Europeans. But back to elections. In the last UK election, the victorious Labour Party won 411 seats, or 63% of the total, while only winning 33% of the vote. And that's only possible thanks to first past the post, and 2 strong parties on the political right splitting those right-wing voters. And normally here in the US, with a few exceptions such as California, Georgia, Maine, and a few others, there's a contest between the 2 major parties getting 95% or more of the vote, with a handful of smaller parties maybe getting 5% if they're lucky. But voters reward success, and a party that never gets elected never becomes successful, so they're never rewarded with more voters. First past the post puts a limit on how far those minor parties can realistically go. They didn't get enough votes in the previous election, so it's harder to raise money for the next one, and they're stuck in the single digits for the most part. But what does happen is that those major parties sometimes adopt policies first proposed by the smaller ones. Like Democrats, they embraced welfare reform policies that originated across various socialist or left-wing parties in the early 1900s, and about 50 years later, Republicans adopted libertarian ideas to counter the Democrats. But this doesn't leave much room for smaller parties to make their case for how they would improve anything. Another reason third parties don't break through in the US is that we're a presidential system, where the executive is a separate branch from the legislative. This is different from the vast majority of Europe, where their heads of government come from their legislature or parliaments. France is a little bit of both, which might explain why they have that unique 2-round system of voting, but France is often a special case when it comes to politics. Parliaments often work by forming coalitions. Different parties coming together towards a common governing agenda and getting a majority of members on board. Voters in Germany, Spain, and Italy, they're all very used to this. And it doesn't happen in the UK that often, but it does, thanks to their 2 major parties, the Conservatives and Labour, usually not needing to form a coalition, but it does happen. In fact, the last time was about 16 years ago in 2010. But more on the UK in just a minute. We in the US simply don't need that in order to get a functioning government, because in the US, our government is formed by the president, who picks their cabinet or the heads of major departments from their political allies, and usually within their own political party. But they do have to be confirmed or blessed by the Senate. And while that is easier when the president and the Senate are on the same side, until the 1990s, the Senate usually just deferred to the president's choices anyway, even when not politically aligned, because the president in theory has a popular mandate to govern, at least in theory. Americans are also generally wary of all-powerful governments. Call it our cultural DNA, rooted in being thousands of miles away from the seat of government. The Stamp Act, Boston Massacre, Battle of Yorktown in 1781, and all that. We never really shook that off. And even the party more tolerant of that stronger central government tends to see its president checked at the next midterm. In fact, in the last 80 years since the parties settled in roughly their current ideological positions, we've only had a trifecta, meaning control of the White House, House, and Senate for only 30 of those years. And that correction back to divided government typically happens fast. Usually in a new president's first midterm, we have one of those coming up. But even when a president governs exactly as promised, voters usually form an energized opposition, slam on the brakes, and gives Congress to the non-presidential party, or at the very least makes things a lot closer. But there are times when the previous version of a party effectively died. The name hung around, but basically everything else changed. For example, Republicans were punished severely during the Great Depression. FDR carried 42 of the 48 states in his first election in 1932. Democrats picked up 12 Senate seats, 96 House seats, and the Senate Majority Leader, a Republican, lost his own election. And that was the political reality in DC for almost 20 years, all the way through World War II. In Europe, that Republican Party would have simply been replaced by another party with similar or slightly tweaked ideas. But like dollar bills, ignoring the metric system, and tipping, we Americans love our silly traditions, especially ones that other countries have long since thrown away. Between the Civil War in 1860 and FDR's election in 1932, Republicans had held the White House for 52 of those 72 years. But when they emerged from the political wilderness in the late 40s, they were already starting to become more aligned with Southern conservatives rather than their previous power base in the Northeast, ignoring largely everything that made them the dominant force in American politics for decades before the Great Depression. And that realignment was set in stone after the Civil Rights Acts of the 60s, and today's Southern conservatives are the fiscally and socially conservative Republicans, not the Democrats of the 19th century. Europe's only first-past-the-post analog, the UK, is undergoing a similar shift now. New parties are forming across the right and drawing in formerly loyal conservative voters. On the left, thanks to widespread dissatisfaction with, as of now, Starmer's Labour government, an ascendant Green Party is becoming a real threat to Labour's left flank, even if your party isn't going anywhere. Nigel Farage's Reform UK is leading in the polls while the Greens hoover up all those left-wing votes. And with several years still remaining before the 2029 election, unless both the Conservatives and Labour adjust course, Britain is looking at a political realignment not seen since the Liberal Party was replaced by Labour over 100 years ago, perhaps even larger, because the Conservative Party, or their ancestral Tories, have been either the largest or second largest party since before they really had formal parties, going all the way back to the late 1600s. And here in the US, we're undergoing our own internal drama, in case you haven't noticed. MAGA's takeover of the Republican Party is complete, but many traditional Republicans feel politically homeless. On the left, the Democratic Party is struggling with its stance on Israel, with younger voters demanding a clean break, while older, more centrist leadership looks for room to maneuver, or maybe tack to the center, to win over those disaffected Republicans. This tension within each party means there's constantly a tug of war between its right and left flanks. Generally, the left pulls the Democrats towards its left, but usually only if and when the Republicans implode, like in 1932 and 1964. It gives them a window of opportunity to make a really big shift. For Republicans, it gets pulled to the right, like after Carter's unpopularity in 1980 or Gingrich's contract with America in Clinton's first midterm in 1994. For American political parties, the status quo is only possible to overcome if an opportunity is presented by an inept other party. After some soul-searching in the minority, new ideas are adopted and implemented in the next election. If those new ideas help win the election, then they're adopted as party doctrine, like Democrats being in favor of an expanded safety net with Medicare and Medicaid in 1965, with the Republicans supporting limited government since about 1980. And while many Americans may look to Europe's embrace of multi-party politics, there are simply too many structural and cultural roadblocks to make that possible here in the US. Like the presidential form of government that removes the need for a parliamentary coalition to form a majority. European parties come and go, yet the US allows existing parties to be taken over by new ideologies every few decades, thanks to first past the post, meaning a candidate can win even if most people vote for someone else. But don't confuse stability for continuity. Formerly the home of disaffected Confederates, today's Democratic Party counts African Americans as one of its most loyal constituencies, while the former isolationist Metropolitan Republican Party is the modern home of interventionist and Southern conservatives. But don't believe me, just look at the maps. The Democrats dominated the Solid South before the 1960s. Then they flipped, with Republicans dominating those same voters for the past 50 years. Today, the Solid South isn't Democratic blue, but red, and yes, we do flip our colors here in the US. While Europe's need for coalition, thanks to its largely parliamentary nature and use of proportional representation and party list, allows new parties to break through and get a seat at the table, America's majoritarian government and electoral systems create coalitions within parties that European parties just lack. And to quote Battlestar Galactica, all of this has happened before. While minor parties can spoil results, they rarely win office on their own. Like the 1860 election that gave us Abraham Lincoln. The biggest issue, obviously, was slavery. The Republican Party, less than a decade old at this point, was the only anti-slavery party, and they dominated the North, winning 18 states, but only winning 39% of the vote. That disparity is thanks to the Democratic Party being split in two over slavery, with a Northern and Southern Democratic parties and a fourth Constitutional Union Party, which took at least what was considered then a moderate approach toward slavery. The result in the end, Lincoln dominated the North, pro-slavery Southern Democratic dominated the South, and the Northern Democrats and the Constitutional Union Party won a handful of the soon-to-be-called border states. Fast forward to 1912, and former Republican President Theodore Roosevelt wanted to get back into the White House. This obviously didn't make the sitting Republican president, William Howard Taft, who was also running for re-election, very happy, so they split the Republican vote. So much that Woodrow Wilson won 40 states while only winning 41% of the vote, becoming the first Democrat to win the White House in 20 years. Later on, Ross Perot demonstrated this in the 90s, splitting that libertarian small government right-wing vote with Republican George Bush just enough that Bill Clinton sneaked through and won a massive electoral victory while only winning 43% of the popular vote in 1992. These third parties in the US simply lack the organization or bench strength to mount a national campaign. Jill Stein's Green Party shows up every 4 years and may pull enough voters from the left to hand Republicans victories they otherwise would have lost, but even in the best case for Stein, she would have been elected president, alongside a Republican supermajority in the House and the Senate, because the Greens simply do not run enough candidates to hold a congressional majority. In 2024, they only ran 37 candidates in the House and 8 in the Senate. They didn't win any, only getting a little over 180,000 votes in the House, out of around 144 million votes total. Stein herself only won 0.6% of the vote. And that's the reality of first past the post. If you reject the lesser of two evils on principle, the greater of two evils will sneak through. Anyway, I hope this helps you understand a little bit about elections. If it did, please consider hitting that subscribe button, and in a couple of weeks, I'll be back with another topic affecting the US and or Europe. I'm analytical, always honest, and I try to explain some of these huge concepts in a way you don't need a PhD in political science to understand. Learn more about this and other topics at transatlanticbrief.com.